Welcome back to Throw In. I'm Ethan Brander.
And I'm Max von Gries.
Today we're going to cover some of the NFL's biggest stories from Week 8 and talk about how we think players are going to perform in Week 9. To start, let's head over to the Windy City to talk about Bears receiver Allen Robinson. Robinson currently ranks 59th among all receivers in fantasy production. He's coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons and has been the number one receiver on the Bears for the past couple of years by a mile, making his massive dip in production extremely unexpected. Coming to the season, most people saw him as a potential wide receiver 1, and because of this, he was selected in the second or third round in most fantasy leagues. I personally believe his down year has been more to do with the terrible play calling from Matt Nagy and Justin Fields going through growing pains as a rookie. It was expected that Robinson was going to be traded, but as the deadline came and passed, the Bears did nothing. Because of this, if you have him, I would do what the Bears did not and trade him. Chicago is unlikely to fire Nagy during the season, and they face a gauntlet of solid defenses this season. Unless something changes, Robinson is just too risky to start, and by name recognition alone, you might be able to get a solid player or two. Speaking of solid players who underachieved this week, Max, how did Scary Terry do?
Terry McLaurin is my wide receiver too, and he just hasn't been producing the kind of numbers that I need him to put up. Luckily, this past week, I went up against a pretty bad fantasy team, so I was able to squeak by thinly with the victory. And I mean, it's just confusing though. You'd think that McLaurin just isn't getting targets from Taylor Heineke. I mean, Heineke's not that experienced of a quarterback. I personally like him. He has grit and he's tough, but you'd think that he just isn't getting targets. But in fact, he is. Scary Terry's just dropping these passes. He was targeted 7 times over the weekend against Denver and only caught 3 of the targets for a measly 23 receiving yards. Hopefully this performance happened because of Patrick Surtain and that stingy Denver defense. But if not, maybe Terry McLaurin just isn't that guy right now. I think I'm going to start calling you the Hammer because you're nailing these predictions, man. Tell them what I'm talking about.
Did I call it or did I call it? Elijah Mitchell has gone from an unknown rookie from the University of Louisiana to one of the better flex options in fantasy. In 3 out of the 5 games he's played in, he has scored over 16 fantasy points. In the other 2, he had to leave early due to injury, but he still managed over 8 points in those games. Now, Mitchell is currently battling a rib injury and is expected to be limited in practice this week. But if he's healthy, I would still consider him a very good flex option in deeper leagues and a solid player to grab for your bench in leagues with less teams. Now, Max, how did Jefferson of your Minnesota Vikings do this week?
Yeah, Ethan, Justin Jefferson was like some strawberry jam. He was bottled up so much against the Cowboys defense. Unfortunately, that means that he was only limited to 2 catches in the disappointing loss Sunday night against Dallas. I will say that this was a rare sight to see Justin Jettis Jefferson having an off week. He hadn't had a game of less than 60 yards the whole year. I still believe that he's one of the most dangerous wideouts in the league right now, and that he should be locked in as the number 1 wide receiver for any team. Ethan, how did our favorite bandwagon team do against the Jets?
So the Bengals lost to the Jets. Honestly, I'm at a loss for words with this one. New York was coming into this game as one of the worst teams in the league and was forced to use Mike White. You ever heard of Mike White? Because I hadn't.
Never.
At quarterback this game. White has jumped around the league from practice squad to practice squad since he was drafted. The Bengals defense before this game looked like one of the better units in the league, and in perfect Bengals fashion, they let Mike White lead the league in passing yards for Week 8. He led the league. He had over 405 yards.
It's incredible.
Now, don't overreact to this and think White is a viable starter. I still wouldn't start him in Week 9 against the Colts unless you were unbelievably desperate at quarterback. But he did show some talent, so keep an eye on him. On the other side of the ball, Joe Burrow is continuing to live up to that number 1 selection. Even though he did have a crucial interception in the 4th quarter, a lot of the blame for this loss should be placed on Cincinnati's defense and their horrendous offensive line. Burrow has just over 20 fantasy points this week and is still a very good option at quarterback. The Bengals as a team, on the other hand, are so tough to judge. Blowing out teams like the Ravens and taking the Packers to overtime, while also having losses against the atrocious Bears and Jets. It wasn't expected that they were going to be very good this season, so they have massively overachieved already. But they are still a really tough team to determine whether or not they're actually good. Yeah. Well, that's all we have for you this week. Come back next week to see if We were right about our predictions, and listen to us recap Week 9. I'm Ethan Brander.
And I'm Max von Gries.
Have a great rest of your week.